Greetings and welcome to Healthcare Leadership Live. I am Mike Lyons, your host. I am the man behind Seasoned Advice HR Consulting, but more importantly, I'm here to bring you awesome guests who are healthcare leaders who can help you be a better healthcare leader. And today's guest is not only going to help you be a better healthcare leader, but he's probably going to help you be better at home as well, and help with a lot of other things. My guest today is Patrick Rieke, and he is a speaker and a content creator on the topic of burnout, and he focuses on healthcare leaders. So, Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. Well, Patrick, this is like a hot topic. I just was at a conference, and one of the major topics was self-care. And I'd love to get into this topic here about how we can take better care of ourselves. But I'd like to start with, why is it that you do this work, and how do you help others, handle burnout and stress?
Yeah, I mean, the reason is personal in nature, to begin with, experience I had, and we'll kind of get into that story here in just a second. And then also being a leader in healthcare for a long time and seeing my team deal with stress. Healthcare is a stressful industry. I don't think any of your listeners are surprised by that revelation that there's a lot of stress, but there's also moral distress. We'll talk about the difference between those a little bit, but it's always been a hard industry to be in. You care deeply. You're taking care of patients, clients. You're taking care of people, and those things are complicated. So, for me, what I'm doing now after years as a healthcare leader is speaking, presenting, creating content. We've got an online platform that addresses burnout prevention, recovery, but also that leadership side. Like how do we function as leaders to try to reduce that burnout effect as much as we can.
It's interesting, you talked about how healthcare is stressful. One thing I have found in my leadership development work with healthcare businesses is there's a lot of sensitive people in healthcare. Like, you get into healthcare because you care about people. And then ironically, it's one of the most stressful and emotionally taxing fields to work in.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, it's hard to say this. It's hard to, it feels bad to say, but caring, while it's so important. We want to have caring nurses. We want to have caring providers. We want to have caring people at the front desk when we walk into that clinic or that hospital. But caring, while a core component of being in healthcare, is also a liability. And I'm not advocating anyone try to not care. But it's just the nature of it. When we get into it, like you said, so many people want to make a difference. They want to do a good job caring for people. And then what that results in is we have all these feelings and thoughts about what should be happening for our patients, what should be happening for our clients. And then sometimes it's not happening, or there's just too much going on to be able to deliver the kind of care we really wish that we could, or those really dramatic things. We have a patient who doesn't do well or doesn't respond to the treatment, or there's an error or something like that. And then, like you said, Mike, that sensitivity, that deep caring, while it's such an asset and so important for our people working in healthcare, then becomes a liability because it hurts our hearts. The wild thing that I realized early on in this work, working with people on burnout, is people who don't care don't burn out. Because they don't care. You kind of have to be on fire before you burn out. And so it's a little unfair that people that care the most are the ones most likely to burn out.
That is so painfully ironic. So I'm curious a little bit if you would give us a little bit of insight into, you talked a little bit about your experience, but were you on the front lines? Like, how did this become personal for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's important. I always have to kind of go there emotionally. So, like you said, some of us are on that sensitive side, but I think it's important to share for me personally what happened. I led several teams in our healthcare system, a large healthcare system, about 16,000 coworkers, lots of different hospitals. One of my teams responded in person to every patient death at all of our locations. which was always heavy, but that's
Yeah.
sort of what we signed up for. We knew that's what we were doing. Um, then the pandemic came,
Mm.
and volumes changed all over the place. Some things went down overnight. Some things were driven up, and unfortunately, of course, patient deaths is one of those volumes that increased. So we went from if we ever responded to 9 deaths in a day, that would have been just record breaking, that we had
Mm.
responded to 9 deaths in one day, to during the pandemic certain months averaging 9 deaths every single day. So
Mm.
over the course of the pandemic, our team responded to 5,563 patient deaths over those 2.5 years. And you don't do that kind of work, or really any work in healthcare, without it taking a toll. And so watching the toll that it took on my team, first of all, watching the toll it took on our broader health system, of course, and the whole time thinking I was doing fine. I was soldiering on. Sure, I was working 65 hours a week and on call all the time and answering the phone at 2 a.m. and on the weekends all weekend long and everything, not taking vacations and getting phone calls when I did get away, et cetera, as a lot of healthcare workers do. I'm not trying to say I was exceptional. This is almost the norm, I would say, for healthcare workers. And then fast forward to really kind of what I would consider the end of the pandemic, fall of 2022, on my birthday. That day I woke up and I knew something was not right with me physically.
Mm.
I didn't exactly know what it was. I'm not a clinical person, so self-diagnosing is a little bit more of a challenge. But I knew something was off, and so I started to watch my heart rate on my smartwatch, and it was peaking and then it was dropping, and it was peaking and it was dropping, and
Mm.
I knew that wasn't normal. But again, it was my birthday and I had the day off, so we went out to lunch at my favorite Mexican restaurant, me and my family, and we're just kind of doing the thing. And then finally, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my smartwatch actually set an alarm and said, "You may be experiencing symptoms of AFib," and I had never had anything like that happen before. So I went into the ER, my own hospital. I'm about four floors, excuse me, beneath my office, and go in and talk to the physician there. He hooks me up to the EKG machine. So sure enough, your heart's in a persistent irregular heart rhythm.
Mm.
And what we do for people in your situation is we cardiovert you. Now, again, not a clinical person, healthcare adjacent, but I was like, what does that mean? He says, we're going to shock you with 255 joules of electricity. I was like, okay. Well, I knew what the crash cart was, but I wasn't having a heart attack. I didn't have any pain. So I was
Mm.
surprised that here I am, getting hooked up to the crash cart. And sure enough, ended up deciding to go without sedation. So wide awake, I got that 255 joule of shock, and all my appendages came up off the bed. I kind of jerked up off the gurney and then crashed back down, and learned why they called it the crash cart, because my body kind of crashed up and crashed back down.
Mm.
And that really should have been you would think that would have been the moment that I realized, like, oh geez, I've really been taking on too much stress. I haven't had good boundaries. I've let work kind of overrun everything in my life. I feel silly to say I didn't really take it to heart at that point. It wasn't until a few weeks later with my general practitioner, I was telling him about what was going on. Of course, he'd seen the notes in the chart, and then telling him about some other things. And then he started asking more questions. And by the end of that appointment, he diagnosed me with depression and anxiety for the first time in my life. And so then I go to a therapy appointment about a week later, and I tell her, well, I was diagnosed with AFib. It's vaguely mediated, meaning my vagus nerve, my nervous system was just shot. That's why my heart went out of rhythm. And now I'm depressed and I'm anxious. And I said, but I don't really think they're all connected. I'm having these physical things and I'm having these emotional things. And she just kind of looked at me like I was the dumbest person in the room, because at that moment I was. She said, no, these are obviously connected and some things are going to have to change. So
Mm.
that was finally, the penny finally dropped in the room with her. Where she connected the physical things I was experiencing, which now I know is very common for people on burnout, these physical manifestations of
Mm.
what they're experiencing, and then the emotional side too.
Wow. That I'm kind of blown away, because I just had like a couple ahas there. It's so funny that you hear people make comments like, "Oh, my nerves are shot," I'm on my last nerve or whatever, and it's like, it's almost like a throwaway kind of comment, but the story that you just told makes it totally real that absolutely your body can start to shut down in a way because of the stress. Is that for real?
Well, that's what I thought for quite a while, and I thought I was just being insightful about myself. Oh, the real reason I had AFib was blah blah blah, and then you go through all the tests, right? So I wore a heart monitor for my doctor's very thorough, so I wore it for 6 weeks. Shaved chest, sticky patch every day.
Hmm.
Monitoring it, which was not fun. I'm sure some of your listeners have done that before and not enjoyed it either. And stress tests, blood tests, follow-ups, appointments, medication, and everything. 6 months later, I'm sitting with a physician that I hadn't known yet. He's an electrophysiologist or electrocardiologist. So he's looking at the electrical patterns of the heart. So, for what had happened for me. And he's asking me again, all these questions. This is 6 months after the AFib incident and getting shocked on my birthday and in the hospital and everything. And he said, well, Mr. Rieke, I usually can't diagnose exactly why a person has AFib to begin with, but I can in your case. And that's when he gave me that term, vaguely mediated AFib, that it all does come back to your nerves. So the insight that I felt I had with my therapist and my GP, then being confirmed by this specialist saying, yeah, no, it's real. Like the real reason that your heart went out of rhythm is because your nervous system was overloaded. And then, I'm sure you've talked with people who they're so stressed that they're having heart palpitations and that sort of thing. And it is a very real connection that people experience.
This show is sponsored by Seasoned Advice HR Services, where I help clinical healthcare businesses to make more money and save more money by hiring better, retaining better, and reducing your HR risk. If you would like an HR assessment or ongoing HR support, please reach out to me at seasoned-advice.com. I think it makes me think about when I was a healthcare leader during COVID, and I can't say that I had the same adversities and challenges that you went through and that your staff went through, but I had some probably unhelpful ways of coping with that. And I'm curious, so that's where my mind is kind of going. So like when people go through a stressful time, and I want to get into the helpful things, but like, what do you see people doing that is the wrong way to handle that?
Well, the insane response that is so common is to double down and work harder.
Oh.
Say, man, I'm so stressed. Things are not going at work. I just need to get through this. And of course, then we all fall victim to the next week, things will be normal. Next week's always normal, or 2 weeks from now is always normal, where this week is a real mess. And so we just keep putting it off, or we double down. I talked with one colleague who she's in the PR side of things for healthcare. And she said she basically had a mental breakdown, a physical breakdown. And her decision after that was, I need to get more serious about work. I need to work harder. And, she said the same thing. Looking back, I realized that was insane. But for those of us who've taken our work seriously, who've taken our maybe a mission, and sometimes we call it a calling, right? This is our calling to go in and to do this thing. Well, you don't let yourself out of those things very easily. So that working harder, of course, it's very easy to say we've got to draw better boundaries, and everybody says we've got to draw better boundaries. But man, it's hard to do, because we care about what's going on. And maybe we've been in a habit for years of, I take on this responsibility. I raise my hand for this. I'm the person they call for this. It was wild, Mike. After 6 months of being out of healthcare, I was traveling to Niagara Falls with one of my sons to check off a bucket list item of seeing Niagara Falls. And my phone rings while we're in the car together. And it's a trauma surgeon from the place I used to work, because he had an ethics consult and I led the ethics committee, and he, like, in his brain somewhere, he knew I wasn't there anymore, but it was just his automatic response. I have an ethics thing. I dial up Patrick Rieke and get him on the phone. Well, those things that become such habits of our coworkers, of ourselves, that we don't really take out and analyze. We don't really say, why am I doing this all the time? Why am I always going to that meeting? Why am I always the person that's doing that thing? Do I need to continue doing it? It's that buildup over time and those habits that get us into that work overload sometimes.
So it sounds like maybe one thing that folks could do is do some self-examination or reflection. Is that right?
Yeah, I think looking at your calendar. So let's talk about energy for a second, right?
Yeah.
So look at your calendar, look at your task list, your responsibilities. What if you're a bedside person, what are your responsibilities? If you're a leader, what are your meetings, your committees that you're on? Whatever it may be, and then think about what of these tasks or responsibilities or meetings, what's draining my energy.
Mm.
You see, your body already knows, right? Your body are like the way you physically feel when you have to do that thing or go to that meeting. Your body's already tensing up, and paying attention to that. So now cluing your mind in, okay, my mind knows too that this meeting, let's say this meeting that happens on every third Thursday at 10 a.m. always stresses me out. And then to put a little box around it and ask yourself a couple questions. One is, do I have to keep going to that meeting? Usually the answer is yes, right? But if it's not, then maybe you can step out of it. Maybe somebody else can go to that meeting instead. Maybe you just need the email minutes afterwards. And then second of all, if you have to keep going to that meeting, how can I make sure that the 10 o'clock on Thursday morning meeting doesn't ruin my entire week? So I don't know if I'm the only one that's ever done this, but man, if I had that meeting that I wasn't looking forward to, I wasn't looking forward to it all week long. I was thinking about it. It was living in my head. Oh, I got to do this. And I just encourage people to try to keep the stress of that within that box of that meeting. Because, I forget who said I've suffered many tragedies in my life. Most were imagined,
Right.
and we imagine those things. And then the problem is sometimes for me, I'd go to that meeting and I'd be like, oh man, I'm going to see Janet there and she's awful and she's always blah, blah, blah. And then I'd get there and Janet would be really nice that week. And it's like, oh man, I wasted all this, all this time dreading this meeting. Or, even if she's awful and the meeting really is terrible, to try to keep that energy from eking out into all those other things. Ask yourself, do I have to do it? And if I do still have to do it, how do I keep the energy from draining my energy all week long?
Yeah. It's the getting your mind, right. Like so much of this sounds like it is, something that you can manage in your own mind, but you have to be proactive. It almost sounds like if you wait until it's too late, then that's when you get into trouble. If creating ways of insulating yourself, it almost sounds like that's part of the strategy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think yes and no, because there's a lot of talk about how if we'll just have better self-care, we'll never burn out. That is both 100% true and 100% false at the same time, because you think of things you had to do during COVID, or times you worked for a boss who was demeaning and never listened or didn't care and capable. Well, you just having your meditation app on your phone and doing it for 10 minutes a day isn't going to resolve any of those things. You think of the provider who sees a poor outcome for a patient, or God forbid a patient dies, and they experience some of those things. Them going to their Pilates class or having a pizza party for the staff isn't going to resolve those things, right? However, we want to find personal agency again. So a lot of times when we're burned out, we feel trapped, we feel hopeless. There's nothing I can do. I'm just stuck. So we want to find little ways where we can regain our own personal agency. What I mean is, I want to do this and I'm going to do it, or I don't want to do this and I'm not going to do it. And those things, those little steps, especially when we're totally burned out, and we want to build them in, like you said, ahead of time to prevent that burnout. But one of the most important things I think I could say about burnout and the self-care question is burnout almost 100% of the time is not your fault. You've experienced things. You got into it with a big heart, like we talked about as a caring person. And then you experience things that are just difficult. You've experienced a healthcare system that sometimes doesn't work, that is broken, doesn't have enough staff, doesn't have enough nurses, enough aides, enough providers, enough people at the front desk. And living in that takes a toll, especially if you care about the quality of service that you're providing. So it's not your fault. And there's things that we can do, I think, to protect ourselves and to help ourselves recover.
Mm. Yeah, I love that the idea it's not your fault, because I think that's probably a big part of the problem. And you talked about this, which is we want to try to fix it ourselves. We think, hey, it's all in me. I've got to fix it. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to, self-medicate, that was the avenue that I took when I was feeling stress at a certain time. And that just probably piles more on, or it papers over the same problem, it seems like.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so what are some practical things that people can do if they're noticing the effects of burnout in their own lives?
Yeah. Yeah. I think my self-medicating was just anger, and that's painful to realize, because what we tend to do, and what I did, is I didn't express that anger at my coworkers, because that's dangerous, right? You don't want to express too much anger at your coworkers. Now, from time to time I did, but most of the time I kept it under a lid there. But you can probably predict where that anger came out, and that was at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember very vividly the day, I realized I'm in this burnout place, and my mental health had taken a toll, my physical health had taken a toll. And I remember very vividly my wife saying to me, "Do you realize how much your negativity is impacting the rest of our family?" And wow, I just, sort of opened my eyes and realized, like, they were supporting me, they're helping me. So I'm feeling like everything's going well because they're there for me, but realizing how much it's affecting them. One of the biggest mistakes I made a lot of mistakes, but one of the biggest mistakes I made during my the worst part of my burnout was just obsessively thinking about work all the time. Waking up in the middle of the night thinking about it, waking up in the morning thinking about it. I did a coaching call last week, and somebody types in the chat, "I dream about work all the time." And I think that's pretty common, that people get so obsessed about it. It's very easy. It'd be so easy for me to sit on here with you, Mike, and say, just stop thinking about work so much. Well,
so easy.
It's so easy. Just do it. Just stop thinking about work. Don't think about a pink elephant either while you're at it. Right. The only way we really get out of thinking about work all the time is to think about something else. Right.
Mm-hmm.
This is why doom scrolling and binge watching is very popular among people who are burned out, because it's a way, and we realize I don't want to think about work all the time, so I'm going to do these things that are going to distract my brain. Not sure that's the healthiest way, but we learn something from that we need to not just sit in a dark room and say, don't think about work because you're so obsessed and you need to stop thinking about it. We need other things to think about. So the three things I really recommend. One is just having friends. There's a lot of mid-career professionals. We've lost our friends. We're spending time maybe with the parents of our children's friends more than we're spending time with our actual friends. The second thing is having a hobby, playing games. Do you like to read? Do you like to knit? Whatever else. These consuming activities that are enjoyable, that a lot of us have forgotten about. We don't have any hobbies anymore. And then third of all, my favorite one to always talk about is developing a bucket list, because people love to roll their eyes when I say, oh, you're burned out, you're depressed, you're stressed, maybe you're suffering PTSD. What you should really do is create a bucket list. It sounds very like kind of pie in the sky, but we do this at every one of my workshops and presentations. At the end, I open my bucket list to them, let them ask some questions about it. And I developed my bucket list when I was depressed, when I was burned out, sort of as an intuitive, I need something to do for myself that's not just obsessing over work, thinking about all that stress all the time, being responsible, et cetera, et cetera. And then I get them to engage, to start to think about ways that are things that they would put on their bucket list, and ways they could stop thinking about work and thinking about that. And the energy shift, we start talking about statistics and how many people are burned out and the effects and the characteristics of burnout. And then we end later on talking about retaking our personal agency, drawing some of those boundaries, finding a friend to confide in. And then we end with the bucket list. And what it means is that we say, as a burned out coworker, especially if we're a healthcare leader who's taking so much responsibility, we say to ourselves, I still matter. The things I want to do matter. and maybe I can take a little step today towards accomplishing one of these things on my list. It's just I would describe it as the opposite energy of burnout. So burnout is I'm trapped, I'm exhausted, I don't have any energy, I'm cynical, I'm not making a difference anymore, I don't matter. And the bucket list says I do matter. There's things I want to do. I can affirm myself. I'm valuable. There's these things I want to move towards, and I can actually take steps towards them.
Yeah, I wrote down 2 words, I matter. And that sounds like that is that could be a mantra of someone who's going through this. But then it makes me think, my next thought is, how do you, when you're a leader, how do you recognize if anyone on your team is starting to experience burnout? And then how do you, encourage them to take care of themselves and find some relief from that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most common, one of the most important questions is, as a leader, how to identify it. One of the things I would say for ourselves, which it can be hard to recognize for ourselves too, or for a colleague, is to use the burnout test I've developed. It's easy. It's myburnouttest.com.
Okay.
You hop on there, 2 minutes, you're going to have an assessment of your burnout risk. The interesting thing that we find when people take that burnout test is either they do discover like, oh man, yeah, I'm really at a high level of burnout risk. Other people who are confident they're burned out will find that they actually have low risk and then discover, oh, it's really not actually work. It's these other things. It's my physical health. It's what's going on at home or family relationships or, something like that. And so I think that clarity helps, whether it's for a colleague, to help them see like, okay, is this something that it's just work is stressing me out and this is all that's happening, or maybe work's not that bad and it's stuff that's going on at home. And then you as a leader, you pivot from trying to solve work problems for them, which hopefully are doing somewhat anyway, but you pivot from that to support for whatever they're dealing with outside of work, right? And then, of course, if they do test where they're at that high point, the number one thing that you can do as a leader, and this is going to sound so basic, but we overlook it all the time, is simply to listen. To listen to that coworker, listen to what their griefs are. I know as a leader, we want to solve those problems, right? We want to say, or we want to defend like, well, we can't do that because et cetera, et cetera. I think we all have learned just a leader who's willing to sit and listen and sympathize with that direct report goes such a long way. We talked about earlier, what was the primary thing that my own team was doing, responding to patient deaths. Well, I can't solve that for them. When you've just clocked in and now all of a sudden you're going to the NICU and you're going to be there with a little baby that's just died and they come back and they're telling me how difficult that was. I can't fix that. I can't wipe away how awful it was for them to see what they saw and hear what they heard in that room. But if I listen and I care and I support, funny thing is, Mike, a lot of times when I would do that, just be in that place of listening, at the end, they would say, thank you so much. You helped me so much. And I'm thinking, I literally didn't do anything other than listen and support you and show that I care about you. So I think that's and this is a research proven thing that we want to know that the organization supports us. And the only way we know that is answering that question, is our leader a good listener?
That's a real eye opener, because I think a lot of managers don't even think about it. Number one, it just seems so simple. Oh, and then probably a lot of managers might say, well, they might not think of that as their job. They might think of their job as giving instruction, giving feedback, providing a vision, holding people accountable and things like that. And I'm supposed to sit and just listen to people without an agenda. That's probably not in the comfort zone or in the natural plan of a lot of leaders.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it does feel so basic, but it's so overlooked. Think about meetings that you've been in. This is a practical takeaway that I think a lot of leaders can use. You've probably been in a lot of meetings where the leader talked most of the time and everyone else just sitting, nodding along, kind of going through the agenda. I don't think that sends the right message. That sends a message that the leader has something to say and you will sit and listen. That's the opposite of what we describe as psychological safety. Psychological safety means that as a coworker, I can speak up. I can say when I think something's wrong, or I can say when I think I'm having a problem, or I can admit it when I make a mistake. But if the message, even in those meetings, those staff meetings and otherwise, if the message is the leader talks 80% of the time and only 20% of the time is anything else happening, I think that's where our direct reports receive the message. I don't have anything to contribute. I don't have anything to say. I have to listen to my leader. If we were able to flip flop that and make our meetings a situation where other people are talking 80% of the time. So we're parsing out the agenda items and letting our direct reports or our supervisors talk about those topics. Or we're leading a discussion where as a leader, we're asking questions around a topic and letting other people give their ideas. We set the tone in that way so that when they come in and it's one-on-one, maybe the leader will listen during that time too. So I think that's a great starting point, especially with meetings that get recorded all the time now. You could actually use an AI, like if you record an hour-long meeting or a 30-minute long meeting, you could plug that transcript into AI and say, what percentage of the time was I talking as a leader versus what percentage of the time were other people talking? And that's going to give you a little bit of a sense. What message am I communicating to my team? Do I want to hear what they have to say, or am I the one that's always talking?
I love that. And I love a lot of the things that we talked about here because it almost sounds like doing the things that will make you a better manager will also be anti-burnout anti-burnout tactics, right? And so listening and then taking care of yourself. As a leader, you have to take care of yourself so that you can show up for your team. And then listening to your team, it's not only going to make your employees and your team less likely to burn out, but it's going to create psychological safety. It's going to probably elicit better ideas and more engagement and less turnover. And it's like, hey guys, if you're listening to this show right now and you're a manager, Patrick is dropping, and he has dropped some real nuggets here for you that are going to just help you not only at home, and at work, but they're going to help your employees also. You're going to win if you take this advice. So with that, I want to bring our conversation here to a close. I've loved everything that you've had to say, Patrick. How can people get in touch with you or engage with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I just have them start with that myburnouttest.com. That's easier to remember than trying to spell the last name Rieke, for patrickrieke.com. So that myburnouttest.com is going to give you an opportunity to take that test, provide some resources, and link to all the rest of my resources and main website too.
Okay. Well, Patrick, I really appreciate having you on the show. I wish I had you probably 7 years ago, but I'm glad you're here now. Thanks for the work that you do. Thanks for being on the show. And if you're listening to this show either live or on YouTube or on the audio podcast, please follow, because I get so excited to bring people like Patrick on, and I'm going to continue doing it. But if you can follow this show, you're going to get to participate in that and hear that. And so I would love to have you join that. So with that, thanks for listening. My name is Mike Lyons with Healthcare Leadership Live. Now go out there and lead with confidence.